On December 19, 1944, the East China Sea churned with violence as waves crashed against the sides of warships locked in a deadly contest. Japan's newest aircraft carrier, En Ryu, fought desperately for her survival. She was not only battling the fury of the sea but also the relentless assault of American submarines. Her hull had been pierced by a well-placed torpedo during what was supposed to be her first combat mission. A mission of secrecy and urgency. Carrying one of Japan's most closely guarded experimental weapons toward Luzon. The damage threatened to end her service before it had even begun, yet under the firm and disciplined command of Captain Konam Kosh, the carrier held her course. His steady leadership and precise orders allowed the crew to counterflood compartments and limit the list of the ship to a mere 3 degrees. Giving the vessel a chance to remain afloat and continue forward despite the mortal danger. Beneath the waves, hidden in the shadow of the deep USS Redfish, stalked her target with silent determination. Commander McGregor, seasoned but under immense pressure, studied the crippled Japanese carrier through the periscope. He knew a single strike was not enough to sink a ship of her size. A second salvo was necessary to seal her fate and prevent her from delivering the devastating weapon she carried. Just as he prepared to fire, fate intervened in the form of the destroyer Hanoi, which slipped past the stern of Redfish, perfectly aligned with the submarine's rear torpedo tubes. The opportunity was too tempting. McGregor gave the order to fire, hoping to strike a crippling blow. But the nimble Japanese destroyer twisted and maneuvered out of harm's way, leaving the torpedoes to miss their mark. The carrier remained intact, still moving forward, and McGregor was left with empty tubes and a sinking feeling that his hasty decision had squandered his chance at a prize of immense strategic value. Cursing his own judgment, he wasted no time in ordering the crew to reload a single torpedo. Every man in the submarine understood the importance of the moment. With steady hands, they prepared the last weapon available. McGregor lined up his shot carefully, calculating distance, speed, and angle. At 1,100 yards, he gave the order to fire, and then came the longest 45 seconds of their lives, as the crew held their breath, waiting to see if the torpedo would find its mark and end the voyage of one of Japan's last functioning carriers. The struggle of En Ryu was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a larger story of decline for the Imperial Japanese Navy. By the summer of 1942, the Empire had already suffered catastrophic losses. The battles of the Coral Sea and Midway had cost Japan 1 light carrier and 4 fleet carriers, and these losses reverberated through naval planning circles like a thunderclap. The aura of invincibility surrounding Japan's naval power had been shattered. The tide of war, once seemingly favorable, was now turning steadily against them. In desperation, the admirals drafted a sweeping new construction program, ambitious to the point of impossibility. Their plans called for a rapid expansion of the fleet, especially in carriers. Believing that only by matching America's industrial strength could they hope to regain control of the Pacific. Between August and December 1st, keels were laid for the Inu-class carriers, Onyu, Ogi, and Katsuragi. These ships, although smaller and less armored than their American counterparts, were designed for efficiency, displacing around 20,000 tons and stretching 745 feet. Each could carry up to 57 aircraft. Their decks bristled with anti-aircraft and dual-purpose guns meant to ward off attackers. Yet they lacked the heavy armored decks that gave American carriers greater resilience. Vulnerability was the trade-off for speed of construction. Admirals envisioned a fleet of 14 Inu-class carriers built by 1948, with as many as 9 under simultaneous construction at the peak. Such a bold program relied on assumptions that Japan's strained industry and dwindling access to raw materials could not possibly sustain. As the war ground on and resources grew scarcer, the dream of a powerful new carrier fleet weakened and eventually collapsed under the weight of reality. By the time En Ryu, first of her class, entered service in August 1942 under Captain Kame, the navy that was supposed to protect her had already been devastated. The destroyer fleet, critical for the defense of capital ships, had been decimated. With 50 lost in combat, leaving the newest carriers dangerously exposed to submarines and air attacks. At first, En Ryu and her sister Amagi were to be part of Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. But severe shortages of aircraft and trained pilots meant that neither ship could take part in the last major naval clash Japan would ever wage. When that battle ended in disaster in October, the remnants of the fleet retreated to Japan. For a brief time, En Ryu flew Vice Admiral Ozawa's flag. But the remnants of the once mighty mobile fleet were soon disbanded, leaving En Ryu, Amagi, and the newly arrived Katsuragi idle. Fuel shortages, lack of pilots, and the growing reliance on kamikaze operations in the Philippines further diminished their usefulness. Instead of striking boldly across the Pacific, these ships found themselves reduced to routine patrols within the safety of the inland sea, their potential squandered by the dire circumstances of the war. For Captain Kishi and his men, it was a frustrating and demoralizing existence. Only in late November did they get a glimpse of combat, embarking a handful of A-6M fighters and B-6N torpedo bombers for short patrols, but even then their operations were far removed from the critical battles that raged elsewhere. More blows came when American submarines sank the carrier Shinano and the massive battleship Shinano, proving that no ship was safe beyond heavily defended home waters. These losses ensured that En Ryu and her sisters would remain largely confined to the inland sea, their strength wasted as the war edged toward its inevitable conclusion. Then, on December 13, 1944, Tokyo received news that General Douglas MacArthur's invasion fleet had been spotted near the Sulu Sea. The long-anticipated invasion of Luzon seemed imminent. Panic spread through Japanese command, and the combined fleet issued urgent orders. En Ryu and her sister Ryu were to transport Japan's most desperate and fearsome invention to Manila at once. The weapon was the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, a rocket-powered kamikaze plane designed to deliver catastrophic destruction in a single, suicidal strike. These cherry blossoms, flown by pilots prepared for one-way journeys, represented Japan's last gamble against overwhelming odds. 30 of them were rapidly prepared, packed, and loaded onto the carriers, a testament to both the desperation of the empire and the grim determination of its leaders to continue the fight. No matter the cost, the Okas were loaded into En Ryu's lower hangar deck, and for well over 24 hours, the crew worked at a feverish pace. Energized by the prospect of action after months of idleness, they knew this was the combined fleet's second attempt to deliver Akas by carrier. The first, aboard the massive Shinano, had ended when an American submarine sent her to the bottom before reaching her destination. En Ryu's escort for the important mission comprised two new Matsu-class destroyers, Inoi and Mi, optimized for anti-submarine warfare and air defense. On December 15th, they were joined by the battle-hardened destroyer Shiga, a ship whose name was legendary throughout the Imperial Navy for often being the sole vessel to return from devastating engagements. That night, intelligence reported the enemy invasion was targeting Mindoro rather than Luzon, offering a brief respite. The crew used the time to load additional supplies and personnel bound for Manila, and departure was delayed a day, with Ari given an extra week to load more AKS and to conduct her mission separately. On the morning of December 17th, the sleek En Ryu, her hull and flight deck painted in new zigzag camouflage, slipped away from K-base loaded with planes, torpedo warheads, suicide boats, soldiers, passengers, and, most critically, 30 Oka flying rocket bombs. She carried the hopes for Luzon's defense. Aboard destroyer Hinoki, Lieutenant Commander Sugima oversaw anti-submarine defense, but the weight of the squadron's fate rested squarely on En Ryu's captain, Kame Kishi. Their orders were to proceed to Manila, offload the precious cargo, and await further instructions on the Mindoro counterattacks. The following day, En Ryu and her escorts pushed south through increasingly turbulent seas. Twice the crackle of enemy radar forced tense course adjustments in fear they had been spotted. Though unbeknownst to them, the U.S. Navy's attention was fixed on a savage typhoon exacting a devastating toll on Halsey's Task Force 38. Dawn on December 19th broke with howling winds, towering swells, and poor visibility. Captain Kishi, senses sharpened by years at sea, ordered heightened alert, and the task force narrowly avoided a mine. By noon, the seas began to calm as En Ryu approached the said islands. A few patrols were launched, but the lingering swells made threat detection near impossible. Drawing on his destroyer experience, Kame reminded his men to emphasize sound detection above all, knowing their ears might provide the only warning of impending danger. At 1500, the formation tightened like a coiled spring shear at Point Mumya, off the port quarter, and Hinoki, guiding starboard and Captain Kame and his officers peered into the gloomy horizon. Just an hour later, as En Ryu turned south, she unknowingly set course straight into the path of an American submarine, USS Redfish, prowling under the command of Commander L.D. McGregor. On the afternoon of December 17th, Redfish had been off the China coast when an ultra message from Pearl Harbor warned of an important enemy task force moving south. A Japanese patrol plane soon sighted the sub and dropped a depth charge that missed, and McGregor, scanning the horizon, picked out what looked like mastheads before a large flat top materialized. Gripping the periscope, he barked for battle stations torpedo. This is a big baby, and Redfish surged forward at maximum submerged speed. Just as the carrier zigzagged toward them with 3 escorts in close, McGregor's focus locked on the prize when the target closed at a roughly 30-degree starboard angle, a near-perfect setup. And moments later, the submarine unleashed a spread of 6 torpedoes from about 1,470 yards. Aboard En Ryu, the Soundwatch picked up the contact and confirmed an approaching threat from starboard. The crew's alarms spiked as torpedo wakes appeared, and the deadly noise of an imminent strike reached their ears. Still, they sprang into action, guns firing at the wakes, desperate to comb them. Kame ordered En Ryu into a hard starboard turn at full speed, and the new carrier answered swiftly. The men could only hold their breath as the torpedoes closed. 3 passed harmlessly ahead, but the 4th found its mark and slammed into her forward section just beneath ... on the bridge. Captain Kame, Kishi and his staff were thrown against the bulkheads as the violent explosion rocked En Ryu, the great carrier shuddering as her speed fell away almost instantly. Below decks, the crew knew the situation was dire. The torpedo had torn into the forward control center, flooding compartments essential to steering and communications, and in the chaos, flames leaped out with terrifying speed. Fuel lines burst and electrical wiring caught, turning passageways into smoke-filled tunnels of confusion and danger. Men stumbled through the choking haze, carrying wounded comrades, dragging hoses, slamming watertight doors shut in desperate attempts to contain the flooding. The fires crept hungrily toward the hangar deck where volatile cargo and aviation fuel tanks waited to ignite. In the boiler rooms, the situation worsened when a main steam pipe shattered, blasting the crew with superheated vapor. The scream of bursting metal drowned out the sound of men's voices. Steam pressure plummeted, the great turbines slowed, and En Ryu's propellers fell still as the carrier lurched and then ground to a halt. The ship shivered violently as power failed, plunging her into darkness, while her frame tilted toward the starboard side, seawater forcing its way through her ruptured hull. Yet in those moments of despair, the discipline of the Imperial Navy revealed itself. The crew did not abandon their posts. Fire parties advanced through decks filled with flames, others worked frantically to restore electricity, and the engineers fought to bring boilers back online. Through sheer determination, partial power was restored, auxiliary pumps began to clear some compartments, and Captain Kame ordered heavy trucks, bombs, and even aircraft pushed into the sea to lighten the ship. The effort bore fruit. Slowly, painfully, the list stabilized and En Ryu began to crawl forward again, her hull still bleeding from the wound, but her crew refusing to yield. This fragile victory lasted only minutes. As the wounded carrier crept onward, lookouts suddenly screamed a warning of incoming torpedoes. The men on deck froze for an instant before the ship's gunners burst into action, their barrels flashing as they fired into the water, hoping to detonate the unseen threats. The carrier heeled as her helmsman threw her into another desperate maneuver, but fate could not be denied. The second torpedo slammed into the starboard side just ahead of the bridge. It was a perfect strike into the ship's most vulnerable area, the section where ammunition magazines, aviation fuel tanks, and storage rooms were clustered together. The result was catastrophic. The blast ripped through bulkheads with terrible force, triggering sympathetic explosions. Ammunition began to cook off like thunderclaps rolling through the decks, each detonation stronger than the last. The stored Orca rocket planes, deep in the hangar deck, ignited in a tremendous fireball, flames racing upward, swallowing compartments and spewing black smoke high into the sky. On the bridge, Captain Kame and his officers were hurled across the deck as a fiery blast tore through the forward section. The entire carrier lurched to starboard, her flight deck tilting at a sickening angle. Below, seawater flooded in through the torn hull with alarming speed. The deck angle grew worse, surpassing 30 degrees. Aircraft chained on deck breaking free and sliding into the foaming sea below. Men clung to railings or leapt into the ocean as the deck became impossible to stand upon. Recognizing the end, Captain Kame remained on the bridge, calm in the face of destruction, and ordered his men to abandon ship. He refused to leave, his duty binding him to his command. The crew assembled on the canted deck, saluting and crying Banzai. Long live the Emperor! 3 times, their voices carrying across the waves even as explosions tore through the ship. Some gunners continued to fire into the mist, defiant against the unseen enemy that had struck them. At last En Ryu gave way to the sea. Bow first, she sank beneath the surface, the water rushing over her tilted deck. The bridge disappearing last with Captain Kame and his loyal officers still inside. In just 12 minutes since the first hit she was gone, taking with her 1,238 souls. On the surface, Shiga and Momi struggled to rescue survivors, hauling oil-slicked sailors from the water, while Hinoki turned immediately to hunt the attacker. She dropped depth charges with ruthless determination. The sea erupting in geysers as Redfish dove deeper and deeper, systems failing under the pounding. For 2 hours the submarine endured the assault until at last she slipped away into the deep. Hinoki and Momi pressed on to complete their mission. Reaching Manila on January 4, 1945, even as General MacArthur's invasion fleet bore down, the next day American aircraft found them. Bombers descended, and in the chaos, Momi was struck by an aerial torpedo. The destroyer exploded and vanished beneath the waves with all hands lost. Hinoki fought on, damaged but unwilling to yield, making a final dash for safety. American destroyers intercepted her, and a brutal surface battle erupted. Shells raking her decks, fire consuming her hull until she finally slipped beneath the water. It was the last surface engagement fought between the United States and Imperial Japan. The grim cycle repeated itself once again. Chigurh was the lone survivor of a squadron. Just as so many times before, though her fate too would soon come, as she was sunk weeks later while escorting a convoy. The loss of En Ryu, so soon after her commissioning, underlined the desperate weakness of Japan's once mighty navy. She had been a symbol of hope, a vessel meant to carry Japan's secret weapon into battle. Yet, like Shinano before her, she carried her accuse to the ocean floor rather than to Luzon. Even when the human-guided bombs finally reached the Philippines, in March 1945, they could not alter the outcome. By then, the Imperial Japanese Navy was broken, its carriers destroyed, its destroyers spent, and its sailors sacrificed. The nation itself could see the truth written across the Pacific horizon. War was lost, and no miracle weapon could turn back the tide.